The Empress returns, by Iowa Forever. Chapter 2.04, The Jaws of Cetus, Firestorm. The Lions stood on the command bridge of the rock, waiting as the astropaths took them through the warp and the final approach to Rin's world. The rest of the Dark Angels were heading to teleportariums, drop pods, and Thunderhawk gunships in preparation for deployment against the Tyranids. Eager to join them as he was, there was still more to be taken care of to ensure the fleet would reach the battle intact. Astropath, he said, looking to one of the nearby psychers. Contact the Empress. My lord, we will need our focus to make sure the shadow does not throw us off course. The psycher protested, causing Johnson to frown. Maintain our course and speed. I will let you know when we must drop out of warp space. Now contact the Empress. Yes, my lord. There was a pause as the astropath focused, the Lion keeping his eyes forward. Johnson. The Empress voice called through the mouth of the astropath. Empress, Johnson said. We are starting our final approach on Rin's world. Is our path clear? I have done what I can to make sure that the gaps that the salamanders spoke of remain open. The Empress replied. It will be a narrow gap, though. I have taken that into my calculations, Johnson said. Send a message to the rest of the fleet that they are to focus on the resonance of the rock. Once we reach the mark I have picked, we should be able to drop out of the warp with no real incident. I will alert you if anything changes. And with that the Empress released her hold on the astropath, the psycher slumping over while others rushed to his aid. The Lion kept his focus forward, waiting for the right signals that they were within acceptable distance to re-enter reality. One by one the displays winked on as the rest of the attack force linked to the rock, save for one or two stragglers whose lights faded into the shadow. Lord Johnson. One of the other officers on deck said. We are beginning to receive interference from the shadow. Your orders? Maintain course, Johnson said, folding his arms across his chest. Or were you so quick to forget my command earlier? The navigators may not be able to take the strain. I did not ask for statistics, only service, Johnson snapped. Maintain course, and make sure all personnel are to their battle stations. The officer nodded, heading back to his station as the Lion kept his vision forward. The fortress monastery of the Dark Angels trembled as they moved onward through the warp, some of the astropaths and navigators crying out as the shadow of the hive mind assaulted them. Hold. The Lion called, but a few more moments, and we'll be upon them. I am not sure if the mortals can hold much longer, my lord. One of his accompanying Deathwing noted as two psychers keeled over in shock. We will manage, just a bit further. The Empress field is still too narrow. We must knock out more of the hive nodes than I thought. The rock shook from another shift in the warp, more psychers crying out in agony as the Tyranids assaulted their minds. Johnson was no psycher, but deep in the warp as they were he could feel the null field closing in, thousands of savage minds clawing to get in, trying to break his will to theirs. Johnson smirked. Just like the forests of Caliban. Begin the deceleration process. The Lion barked. The Xenos think they have us in their clutches? Let them learn the true might of the Imperium. The bridge crew responded in affirmation, navigators straining as they maneuvered the rock through the last stages of the warp. The entire structure shuddered, but the Lion barely moved as they were yanked from the warp and back to reality. Right into the heart of Cetus. Rin's world lay before them, its once verdant fields and oceans scarred by war and the encroaching Tyranid menace. Two battle barges and supporting craft held position just above the planet's equator, all of them heavily damaged from constant attack. Beyond, the tendrils of Cetus lashed out against their targets, some snaking down towards Rin's world while others grasped at the defending ships like a child searching for candies. The hive fleet shifted as the rock, the phalanx, and the rest of those ships designated for the first wave pulled out of the warp, perhaps reacting in surprise that its prey could jump in so close to its weakest points. Draw the fleet's attention so that the defenders may withdraw, Johnson said. Void shields to maximum, and have all macro batteries target the central neural nodes. Escorts are to hold defensive positions while we begin our attack. There was a call of affirmation as the rock pushed ahead, the rest of the Dark Angels fleet forming up in escort positions as it closed with the Hive fleet. One of the defense fleet buckled as a Hive ship ripped it in half, the explosion buffeting the rest of the Imperial ships as they tried to make their escape. Just as the Tyranids closed on the first of the damaged battle barges, the Dark Angels made their attack. Building-sized shells and missiles screamed through the void towards their targets, bright plumes ripping through the Hive ships with ease before their defenses could be properly deployed. Just as the Tyranids prepared to receive this new assault, the archaeotech weaponry of the rock fired, dozens of their ships ignited by vast lances of concentrated energy and supercharged plasma. Those that attempted to flee were caught in the fire of the escorts, the warp contorting from the death screams of Cetus vanguard organisms. Beneath this deluge of fire, the defending fleet withdrew to the shadow of the rock. Johnson was momentarily distracted from observing the battle as a new vox chimed in. "This is Captain Murrieta of the Pride of Rin. It is a welcome surprise to see we will be fighting another day." "I thank you for your words, Captain," the Lion said, turning slightly to address the bridge crew. "The Xenos think to bait us into moving too far from orbit. Picket defense, keep Rin's world behind us to prevent outflanking." When he got affirmation from the bridge, the Lion turned his focus back to the Crimson Fists. "What is your status?" "All weapon systems are offline or heavily damaged, and that includes the Hallowed Brotherhood and escorts," Murrieta continued. "Had you arrived a few moments later, we would have lost our void shields as well." "Communications?" "Still online, my lord." "Then that is how we will put your ships to use," the Lion said, turning to a new display as the Tyranids prepared their counterattack, a wave of hive ships and other biomonstrosities charging towards the Dark Angel's wall. "Contact your forces on the ground to let them know that the Lion has arrived, and that I will be landing to take command of whatever forces you have on Magellan." "Our presence on Magellan is minimal, my lord," Murrieta replied. "Most of what remains is centered around New Rin City on Sirocco." "I am well aware of that," the Lion frowned as he continued. "Lord Korax will be taking command of the defense of Sirocco when the fleet is in position. He is aboard the inquisitorial ship Sanguinium Maritors. I suggest you coordinate directly with him once you have finished relaying my orders." "Yes, my lord." With that the communication closed out, the Lion turning his attention back to the battle. The Tyranids had rallied, hundreds of hive ships amassing just out of reach of the Dark Angel's weaponry. Small flashes illuminated the space between them as Imperial fighters and attack craft dueled with lesser Tyranid bioforms, dozens of lights flickering as human and Xenos were torn asunder in the melee. The hive ships pulled up on their approach towards the rock, intending to smash in on the fleet from above and thus avoid much of the fire from the fleet's broadside. Smaller hive ships dove first, rushing towards several outlying escort ships in a mad dash to reach the transports headed towards Rin's world. The Dark Angels rose to meet the attackers, cannons blazing as the bioforms closed. Several of the Xenos creatures faltered and died, but their brethren smashed into the Imperial line, splitting two destroyer-class vessels in half and badly mauling a strike cruiser in their initial attacks. Bioplasma melted through steel and adamantium while spore clusters shot out to deposit lesser Tyranids within the Imperial ships, the assaults countered by a storm of flak from the Dark Angel and Imperial Navy craft backed up by volley after volley from macro batteries and turbolasers. Despite the unrelenting wave of Tyranid attackers, the line held. The transports would be able to unload their troops without interruption. "All ships moved to engage," Johnson said, smirking as one hive ship imploded from a miniaturized warpstorm fired by the Inquisitor's ship. "We will hold the Tyranids there a little longer, and then the true hunt can begin." The Sanguinium Martyr shuddered as it unleashed another salvo upon the attacking aliens, Twilight stumbling a bit as she and the sisters hustled down the hall towards the main hangar. Though technically not part of the main battle line with the Dark Angels, the cruiser had been positioned such that some of the Tyranid bioships had taken more interest in it than Matthias had hoped. The battle had not focused on them, but Twilight found it rather difficult to keep a good pace while the ship rocked back and forth from firing and taking hits from the enemy. Of course, that would be nothing compared to what awaited them on Rin's world proper, if Matthias' briefing had been any indication. "The last of the drop pods are away," Matthias called as Twilight broke into the hangar. He, the Valhallans, and Sister Bianca were standing before a smaller craft than their normal lander, a sleek black dropship marked with the silver eye of the Inquisition. "Empress willing, we'll be able to reach the planet as well." "We'll make it down, Matthias," Twilight said when she reached him. "Even if I have to teleport everyone down, we'll make it." "Hopefully it won't come to that. With the shadow as strong as it is, the last thing we need is for you to kill yourself trying to use your powers." Twilight frowned but said nothing. For all the others had been talking of the hive mind shadow in the warp, she had not noticed much of anything. Perhaps a dull headache here and there, but not the maddening void it was described as. "Regardless, get your sisters aboard, we need to get down there before the Tyranids attack this ship in force." Twilight nodded, stepping quickly around Matthias and up the ramp, the sisters and Valhallans following right behind. She found one seat near the front of the ship, strapping in while looking down at her companions as they did much the same. "Ready to have some fun, Frederick?" Judith asked, clutching the heavy flamer close to her chest. "Yes, I know, so many foul Xenos to play with. Won't they be so happy you sent them to meet the Empress?" "Wouldn't exactly call the Tyranids happy, but we'll kill them all the same," Alexis said as he secured a meltagun next to his seat. "That's how we met Lord Matthias," Actually, our unit got sent in to extract him and a few scientists or some such after Cetus surprised them on Braxis 4. You learn to trust a man after he gets a broodlord that just ate your commissar's head. Twilight shivered, but Sister Judith gave a chuckle. That reminds me of my first combat mission, she said. You should have seen the look on Sister Rachel's face after I punched that techno-heretic's head off. Always a stoic, Rachel, but to see how high her eyebrows went. We can discuss war stories after we have landed, Judith, Naomi said, securing the clasps around her helmet before continuing. Ruth, would you care to lead us in prayer before we enter the battle zone? When Lord Matthias has boarded, yes. Ruth replied with a nod. She did not have to wait long, for Matthias stepped onto the craft and closed the door just as the cruiser was rocked by another hit. Launch. He called ahead, the pilot giving a nod as Matthias took a seat across from Twilight. The craft shuddered before lifting off from the deck, accelerating as it left the hangar and entered the void of space. As they began their main descent, Ruth clasped her hands together and began to pray. Blessed Empress, watch over us on this day of battle, she said. Let not the foul weapons of our enemies scar the bodies of ourselves and our allies, for you are our shield and protector. Grant us thy blessing, O Master of humanity, that our bolters may find their mark and our blades cut down our foes. Lead us not into despair or folly, but shelter us within your light, for your way is truth and glory. Let none of us be found wanting, for we are your sword this day, blessed Empress. Ruth raised her head, giving the rest in the cabin a smile. There is only the Empress. And she is our shield and protector. The others chorused. Twilight had remained silent, though none of the others had seemed to notice. While there were some aspects of their faith that made sense, Twilight was just not ready to make that step into fully joining their worship yet. What are you willing to sacrifice for the true safety of your friends? The words echoed through her mind again, Twilight shaking her head to clear them away. This, Matthias noticed. What is it, Terra? He asked. Is it the hive mind? No, it's just, she started, chewing her lip for a moment as she thought of the next thing to say. Just a bad dream I had, nothing more. The Inquisitor was not convinced, but made no further comment. Twilight turned away, looking to the rest of her friends as the craft rocked from entering into orbit. The sisters were as stoic as ever, save for Sister Judith drumming her fingers against the fuel tank of her heavy flamer, while the Valhallans quietly chatted about something Twilight could not make out. Bianca had her eyes closed in meditation, her hands folded in her lap, and Matthias had rested his chin on his knuckle, his mechanical hand twitching ever so slightly. All of them were nervous, or hiding their nervousness in some way. Twilight did not want to add to their own troubles right now. The ship shook again, jostling the occupants much harder than normal re-entry. What's the situation up there? Matthias called. We are moving towards the main transports. The pilot replied. But a flock of crones has moved between us and the rest of our allies. I am taking evasive maneuvers now. Keep us on course if possible, Matthias said just as the dropship was rocked by another strike. If we are brought down, the closer we can get to help the better. The pilot did not say anything to affirm that he heard Matthias' request, merely taking the dropship to the right as Twilight heard a screech from outside followed by a prolonged burst of gunfire. Gripping her harness tighter, Twilight took a breath before symbolically moving her hand away from her body, flowing through the motions cadence taught her to keep herself calm. For a brief moment at any rate, for the dropship lurched violently downward with another strike. Lord Velas, we've been hit. Tentaclids on our port stabilizer. Can you shake them off? As if to answer Matthias' question, the general roar from the left engines began to sputter and die down, replaced instead by alien chittering and cracks from sparking electricity. Guess not. How far are we from the city? Still 25 kilometers out. The main stabilizers can hold us for a glide, but given our speed we won't be able to make a soft landing in New Rin City. Twilight's jaw tightened, her eyes darting to the rest of the occupants. Decelerate us as best you can, and try to bring us down close to friendly lines as possible, Matthias said finally. If we're forced down, better in one piece and near our allies rather than smeared across Rin's world. As you wish, my lord. Beginning our descent now. The dropship began a more controlled descent, not helped by another shriek from outside followed by a second impact. Is there any way to get some help to drive away those things? Twilight cried over the din. There are 2 flights of Stormhawk interceptors currently engaging the Tyranids, the pilot called back as he took the dropship to the left. There are still about 3 times as many crones for them to face. That was more than enough to get Twilight to fall silent, her grip tightening again. There was another burst of gunfire followed by a shriek, something heavy slamming into the front of the dropship, jostling the passengers once more. The dropship lost more altitude, the left engine still sputtering as the pilot tried to get them back online. Maybe the offer to teleport the rest of the way will be more welcome now, Twilight thought. Before she could voice her opinion, the dropship lurched downward as something heavy landed on top. The cabin was filled with the sound of tearing metal as the Tyrannid ripped through the hull, a massive talon piercing through the metal just shy of Twilight's skull. "We're going down," Matthias cried, undoing his harness and reaching for his bolt pistol. "Shake this thing off before it kills us all." The dropship jerked to the right again, and while Matthias managed to keep his balance, the Tyrannid was similarly undisturbed. More tearing, and a large chunk of the hull above Twilight's head was torn away, giving her first clear look at the beast attacking them. Like those Tyrannids she had encountered on her first day in this universe, it was coated in blue and turquoise armor like that of an insect. Two leathery wings tipped with scythe-like talons helped carry the monster, and now helped it rip open the dropship like a bag of chips. Its head was skeletal and coated in white chitin, its mouth dominated by a massive biological nozzle that dripped with acid. The hive crone fixed Twilight with a stare, the beast hissing as it drew its head back in preparation to attack. It never followed through before Matthias fired, 3 hellfire shells smashing into the beast's face. It shrieked, thrashing its head around in an effort to regain its vision, but pushing its head back inside the dropship to flood the cabin with bioacid proved futile as Judith, having also unfastened herself, shoved Frederick up through the hole and unleashed a column of burning promethium into the crone's face. Twilight jerked out of the way as Sister and Inquisitor battled the Tyrannid, their fire unrelenting until the beast finally released the dropship. "Well, that solves that problem," Judith chirped, pulling her heavy flame away from the hole. "We're still careening out of the sky in a damaged dropship," Twilight cried. "Strap yourselves in before we hit the ground." "Details," the sister shrugged, but she was already back to her seat and pulling the harness back over her head. Twilight's grip tightened further as the dropship spiraled towards the ground, her eyes snapping shut as she braced for impact. She did not have to wait long, for within seconds the dropship slammed into the ground. Twilight let out a yelp as she was thrown against her harness, her armor squealing as it scraped against metal. Sparks and chunks of loose metal flew about the hold, small flashes of purple light flickering where those that would have injured Twilight were disintegrated by the power within her armor. Not that she noticed, as she strained to keep her eyelids shut amidst the chaos. Finally, the dropship slowed to a stop. Twilight waited for a moment before she allowed herself to breathe, opening one eye as she surveyed the wreckage. Supplies and broken metal were strewn everywhere, mixing with dirt that had come in through cracks and other body damage. Fortunately, all of her companions appeared to be alive, if a bit dazed as they undid their restraints. "Are you all right, Tara?" Naomi asked as the Sister Superior crossed to Twilight. I'm fine," Twilight said, giving a quick nod as she tugged at her restraints, pausing only when Naomi stepped forward to undo them herself. "Everyone else is okay?" "For now," Matthias said as he reloaded his bolt pistol. "Hopefully friendly forces saw us come down and are on their way to rescue us, but no doubt the hive mind has their own forces on their way as well. We need to get moving before they find us." Twilight swallowed, giving a short nod as she followed Matthias out of the wreck, unhooking her sword from her hip as she did so. They stepped through the ruined doors of the dropship, Twilight blinking as she got her first good look at Rin's world. The field they were standing in had once been farmland. Besides the long furrow left by the dropship, dozens of massive craters and collapsed tunnels dotted the landscape, with all plant life having been blasted to ash long ago. The shattered hulls of 3 tanks rested nearby, soot and dirt having caked over camouflage until all were a uniform shade of gray. Broken weapons and ammo casings covered the ground, but as far as she looked, Twilight could not see one single corpse, human or alien. In the distance she thought she could see vast pylons of some kind rising from the earth, but she was too far away to determine if they were actually living rather than alien constructs. Above, the sky had been rent apart by the hive fleet, twisted into a myriad of colors and shapes beyond normal comprehension. Massive tentacle-like appendages dipped down from the upper atmosphere, swaying as Cetus devoured all its servants brought to it. Around them, flashes from Imperial ordnance flickered in and out, a dull roar reverberating through the warp as the hive fleet reeled in pain from the counter-assault. While Twilight could still make out the faint lights of stars beyond the battle zone, with the hive fleet so close it was less like stepping onto a new world and more like stepping into the mouth of a giant monster, which was probably true, the more she thought about it. "Try not to stare too much," Alexis said as he came up behind Twilight. "The Tyranids love to bring their ships in closer to spread fear in those that can't fathom the scale of what they're facing." Twilight turned away, looking back to the rest of the group. Matthias had moved to the front of the ship, speaking to the pilot that Twilight could now identify as Magos Errol. The spider cyborg clambered down the wrecked dropship, A power axe clutched in two of his arms while the other two carried some other weapon she could not identify and a small disc. "We are in luck, Lord Matthias," the tech priest droned, holding up the disc for the others to see. Before it went into hibernation, the machine spirit of this ship alerted me to the presence of an Imperial regiment 2 kilometers to the north. "That will be our best bet at getting to New Rin City in one piece," Matthias nodded, looking back to the others. "Stay on alert, the Tyranids can and will attack from all angles if we are caught unawares, and I doubt all 11 of us will do more than slow them down. Nikolai, Alexis, you take point." "Yes, Lord Velos." The two Valhallans moved forward, their meltaguns as the ready for any attack. Sisters Judith and Rebecca followed while the other three formed up behind Matthias, Twilight, Bianca, and Magos Errol, the small gaggle of humans starting off as a quickened pace towards the north. They stopped only when confronted by the sound of gunfire, all of them surveying the area in case a firefight was drawing closer to them and starting up only when they were certain they were alone. Stop, search, start, repeat. Such is their advance as they continued towards their destination. Ahead, Twilight could see a massive structure rising from the gloom. New Rin City was positively tiny compared to the hive cities of Caesarea and Terra, but it still dominated an area roughly the size of a small mountain. Smoke from industrial buildings mixed with that rising from fires and other damage, joined by columns of glowing anti-air fire rising to strike any Tyranids that drew close. And ahead, Twilight could see a column of tanks and transports moving towards them. "Cadians," Nikolai said from ahead. "I don't think they've spotted us yet." "They will once we move closer," Matthias said, moving past the Valhalland and starting towards the Imperial forces. "Let me do the talking, but stay on alert." Twilight said nothing, keeping her attention focused forward as they drew closer to the friendly forces. As she walked, she could feel some loose dirt sliding out from beneath her boots, a faint tremor following after her as she and the others knocked away small clods of dirt. Now, the Cadian forces spotted them and pulled to a halt, heavier vehicles taking up defensive positions in case they were attacked. "Identify yourselves." A voice called through a Vox speaker on one of the leading vehicles. "Matthias Velos of the Ordo Xenos." Matthias called back, quickening his pace so he could close and not have to shout to get the guardsman's attention. "Our dropship was brought down just south of here and we require passage to New Rin City." There was a pause before the hatch of the lead vehicle popped open, an older man in a peaked cap popping out as the group finally closed to a reasonable distance. "Captain Steiner, Cadian 501st, the man said. "You've come at a difficult time, Inquisitor. Our orders are to link up with the Catachan 211th to strengthen the defense of the main road to the city. We do not have any vehicles to spare for your conduct to New Rin City." Twilight's heart dropped. No vehicles meant they were in for a long walk towards the city, not helped by the constant threat of Tyranid attack. "At least with friendly units nearby we won't be too far away from rescue," she reasoned. She paused as she felt the ground shift again, a couple pebbles rolling away from her towards the horizon. She made to speak, but Matthias' conversation with the column commander could not be impeded. "At the very least you can send a Vox to the city," he said. "Perhaps a Valkyrie could pick us up and take us the rest of the way." "I will see what I can do." The captain slid back down the hatch before calling back up. "Though if you continue on, you'll most likely reach the next column before too long. The rest of the 501st should be along shortly. Short-range Vox communications may only get us so far," Magos Errol said as he moved away from the group. "I will do what I can to increase the range of communications." "Do what you can," Matthias said, pausing before looking to Twilight. "I could pull inquisitorial authority, but the front will need all the help they can get." Right. Twilight looked off into the distance, her eyes tracking a few anti-air missiles before they blasted a few Tyranid biomorphs from the sky. "I suppose I could work out a more effective rotation schedule to make sure we keep all units at full fighting capacity." She paused again. Another tremor, but this one much more noticeable than the others. "Matthias, did you feel that?" "Feel what?" Matthias asked, one eyebrow raised. "Tremors," she said, looking around again. "At first I thought it was just loose earth, but they seem to be consistent and getting stronger. Is Rin's world geologically stable?" Her breath caught when she saw Matthias' face. The normally calm Inquisitor looked at her with a face of pure shock, his right hand quivering ever so slightly. "Terra," he said, his voice low. "Run, now." Twilight could feel her magic flowing into her sword, purple flames racing down the blade as she looked around for some incoming threat. She did not have to wait long before the command vehicle exploded, a massive column of smoke and fire rising up as the group recoiled from the wreckage. Rising up from a hole beneath the vehicle was a massive serpentine creature, propelled forward by 6 stout claws. Twilight could only stare and watch as the monster tossed its head back, swallowing one unlucky guardsman in a single bite from its fanged maw. The beast leaned forward before unleashing an ear-piercing shriek, blood and phlegm spiraling out towards the ground. Moloch! Bring it down, Matthias bellowed, rushing to the right as he raised his bolt pistol to fire. Alexis and Nikolai were first to step forward, bracing themselves before firing their meltaguns up into the tyrannid's face, two molten holes punching through the beast's chest. The Moloch shrieked again, swinging to the left before diving back into the ground, shearing off the side armor of a nearby chimera as it continued tunneling. It was out of sight almost as soon as it had arrived, though Twilight could still see the furrows left by the Moloch's tunneling. Damn it, Naomi yelled, sprinting up to one of the tunnels left by the monster. It'll come back around or another attack, no doubt. Keep your flamers on that tunnel, sister, Matthias said as he swept his pistol across the horizon. The Moloch's just the first wave, the main force will be along soon enough. Twilight spun in place, eyes darting back and forth. The Cadians had begun to spread out, some of the vehicles taking potshots at the Moloch as it circled the column. Panic had not quite settled in on the humans, but the sudden attack and the loss of their commander had certainly done a number on their effectiveness. Seconds later, the Tyranids arrived in force. Twilight jumped back as more creatures burst from the ground in front of her. They resembled smaller versions of the Moloch with proportionally larger talons, each one giving her a hiss before attacking with a storm of needles launched from their chests. Twilight quickly tossed up a magic shield, the spikes shattering against the purple wall without much effort. The beasts rushed forward, but Veronica and Ruth stepped up to shield Twilight, their bolters roaring as the Tyranids rushed to meet them. Twilight raised another shield, the Tyranids snarling as they clawed at the barrier while she and the sisters retreated back towards the main fight. From the hole left by the Moloch came a tide of smaller organisms, dozens of them scrambling forward to attack the humans beyond. With talons raised they bound forward, stopped only by sisters Naomi and Judith as their flame weapons roasted the oncoming Xenos. The Tyranids shrieked and bled away, sweeping out like flocking birds in search of new targets to overwhelm. By now the guard had reassembled and began providing adequate supporting fire, last bolts and heavy gunfire pulverizing any Tyranids not caught by the sisters' flamers. As they focused upon the first wave, the guard was oblivious to the Moloch's return. With a roar the tunneling bioform lunged towards another chimera, its chitinous body ripping through metal as the beast lunged to grab the humans within. This drew fire from two other support vehicles, but once again the Moloch slid away before any lasting damage could be inflicted, followed soon after by another horde of lesser Tyranids charging from the tunnel it left behind. Those guardsmen that had deployed from their transports moved to meet them, volleys of lasgun fire slowing the Xenos momentarily before they came crashing into the human lines. Fight turned to slaughter as the Tyranids tore through the guardsmen. Flak armor provided only scant seconds of protection before the sheer weight of Xenos broke through, some soldiers getting only one choke scream before talons and teeth shredded through flesh and cloth. The Tyranids barely slowed, charging deeper into the Imperial formation while small snake creatures darted forward to devour the fallen. Twilight and the two sisters with her hurried back to the others, Twilight channeling her magic once more in preparation to strike. Ahead, Judith and Naomi had been forced back to back, a ring of flames and charred Tyranids surrounding them as the aliens tested their defenses. Matthias, Bianca, and the Valhallans were pressed up against one chimera with several guardsmen, Rebecca pulling several wounded men away as more Tyranids lashed at them. Furrowing her brow, Twilight released her power, dozens of small purple bolts flying out and punching through the Tyranids like wet paper, the creatures shrieking again as they fled this new assault. Any lead on our escape? Matthias asked as Twilight joined him, firing another salvo of hellfire shells into an approaching Tyranid. No, but we can't just leave these soldiers here to fight against this. Twilight turned, bringing her sword into a guard position as more of the larger snake Tyranids came charging forward. The first swept its talons towards her head, chitin ringing against metal as she easily blocked the strike. Can't we just find the Tyranid controlling the swarm and kill it so the others flee? If you happen to see a synapse creature, please point it out to us. Matthias lunged forward and planted his sword between the attacking Tyranid's eyes, kicking the corpse away as two more aliens rose up to take its place. Twilight brought her sword down and raised her hand, her body shimmering before time slowed down to a crawl. Darting forward she sliced the throat of one Tyranid, stepping to the left before stabbing the second up through the jaw, ducking away just as time returned to normal and the two dead aliens flopped forward. I actually killed something, she squeaked, just as Ruth pulled her away from the sweeping claws of several more Tyranids. Do not lose focus, Tara, Ruth said, emptying a burst of fire into the oncoming horde. We can discuss this later once the Xenos have been cleansed. Twilight gave a quick nod, turning back to the battlefield. Judith and Naomi had cleared an impressive amount of Tyranids, carefully stepping over dead bodies as they moved back towards the guard. Other soldiers had moved forward to relieve them, lending additional flamers to burn back the tide of enemies. With another shriek, the Tyranids fell back, some ducking under the flames as they retreated behind the wrecked vehicles left by the Moloch. They shriek and run away whenever that Moloch moves to attack, Twilight said, channeling her power again as she clamped her sword back to her hip. I've got an idea, we just need it to show up and then we can. Twilight did not have time to finish before the Moloch attacked, the beast leaping out of the ground before plunging down towards Judith and Naomi. The sisters had no time to turn their flamers towards the attacker, the monster giving another shriek as it opened its jaws to devour the two. It never connected, for a lavender glow had surrounded both it and the sisters. Judith and Naomi blinked in surprise before they were yanked away from the Tyranid, Twilight drawing her right hand towards her while raising her left. The Moloch trashed about as it was gently levitated away from the rest of its fellows, a few of the smaller Tyranids pausing to gauge whether this new development presented a threat beyond merely getting shot. It's pinned. Good work, Terra, Matthias cried. Alexis, Nikolai, bring it down. The Valhallans did not waste a second, stepping forward again and raising their meltaguns to their shoulders. Immobilized, the Moloch could do nothing but scream and thrash as the meltaguns fired, molten fissures ripping across the monster's armored shell. Twilight shifted her hands, pouring more power into her telekinesis as the Imperials fired again and again. With one final wail, the Moloch stilled, Twilight releasing her power and dropping the corpse on top of a score of unlucky Tyranids with a crash. Twilight staggered forward, dropping her hands as she tried to catch her breath. That took a bit more out of me than I thought it would, she said, pulling herself back up to her feet and taking out her sword again. I'm surprised you've been able to use any psychic powers at all, Matthias said, helping Twilight to straighten up. With the shadow as strong as it is, the fact you're not showing any strain is incoming. Twilight did not have time to react before Matthias yanked her to the ground. Second later, several large crystals smashed into the wreckage and vehicles beyond, splattering all that had not succeeded in finding cover with corrosive acids. Above was yet another Tyranid creature, wings beating as it hovered over the battlefield. Two of its limbs terminated in a massive cannon, ichor dripping from the nozzle as it searched for more targets. Its head was dominated by a bladed horn, and Twilight could see faint wisps of some kind of energy radiating off its skull. With a bellow, the beast swooped downward, the remainder of the Tyranids surging forward on its command. Well, there's the Synapse creature, my lord, Alexis said from behind Matthias. Orders? Let the vehicles handle the tyrant, Matthias said. Hera, do what you can to try and shut down its psychic powers. I burned out a lot of energy trying to kill that Moloch and you want me to stop that? Twilight cried. That thing stays up, we're all dead. Matthias would have said more, but the tide of Tyranids had smashed into the remaining Imperial forces, the Inquisitor and his henchmen rushing forward to relieve the Sister of Battle. The Hive Tyrant circled overhead, taking shots into the back of the column while eyeing the melee below. Twilight channeled her magic again, raising her hands towards the hovering beast before releasing. There was a pause before a flurry of sparks exploded around the Hive Tyrant, purple flashes burning small holes into the monster's armor. The Tyranid leader bellowed in pain, sweeping down towards Twilight so to better face this new foe. Twilight raised a shield, the Hive Tyrant pulling back before smacking into the shield. This was only a momentary reprieve before the Tyrant struck, the air around the beast twisting before a bright green bolt of power smashed into the shield, shattering it and sending Twilight reeling. With a leer, the Hive Tyrant swooped down, slamming its tail into the ground as Twilight tried to get back up. Another shield helped to cushion the blow, though it was not enough to keep her from being knocked back further. Shifting her free hand about, Twilight reached out through the warp, disappearing with a pop just as the Hive Tyrant struck again. She reappeared further down the line, behind a squad of guardsmen lending fire to the battle in the center. The Hive Tyrant spotted her and took flight, bellowing once more before firing its cannon at her. Yet another shield was enough to hold the shots off, but the swarm shifted and now threw its weight against the guardsmen, even if they were slowed slightly by Twilight's shield. She gave another yelp and shifted her powers, a stream of purple bolts striking down the onrushing Tyranids before they could attack the guardsmen. The Tyrant swooped back down, another bolt of energy rushing forward and exploding among the humans, three crying out in pain before the psychic energy shattered their bones like glass. With the other humans falling back, Twilight was alone. The Tyrant growled in triumph, circling above her in preparation for an attack. She channeled her power again, opening her mind in preparation for another teleport, but to her surprise the spell fizzled in her hand, countered by another shift in power from the Tyranid monster circling above her. Thus stranded, Twilight readied her sword, watching as the hive tyrant drew closer and closer. No, she said, channeling her power once more. No, I am not dying here. I am not going to fail Celestia here. She thrust her hand forward, 3 purple bolts shooting out at the hive tyrant. The beast countered with shields of its own, but one of the bolts managed to break through, exploding against the monster's carapace and knocking it back in the air. The beast managed to right itself, ignoring the gaping hole in its carapace left by Twilight's attack, glaring down at Twilight before swooping in for a final strike. Just before it struck there was a dull thud, followed soon by a massive explosion that finished the job of knocking the hive tyrant from the sky. Twilight scrambled back as the beast crashed into the ground, its horn slicing through the air near her head. As the hive tyrant struggled back from the dirt, Twilight looked around, her head snapping left and right as she tried to locate her rescuer. Striding through the Imperial lines was a mechanical giant, nearly 10 meters tall and painted in gleaming white and gold. The machine barely stopped as it fired again, the battle cannon shell once more knocking the hive tyrant about. The tyrant rose into the air and bellowed, the sound drowned out by the throaty roar of the giant's massive chainsword as it swung towards the tyrant. The attack missed, but the arrival of the giant was enough to send the Tyranids into a flurry, smaller strains falling back to the tunnels while the hive tyrant swooped out of reach of the newcomer. Taking a breath, Twilight thrust her hands forward once more, a cascade of sparks exploding around the Tyranid again before the giant was upon it. Mere vox casting would not have gotten us such power. Twilight jumped as Magos Errol appeared next to her, power axe dripping with Tyranid blood. Fortunately, knights sworn to the salamanders were also within reach. Go and assist the Inquisitor. Twilight gave a quick nod, hurrying through the battlefield as the knight slammed into the downed hive tyrant. Matthias, his henchman, and the sisters had formed up near a slightly damaged Lehman Russ, firing off a few last bursts as reinforcing guardsmen took care of the rest. Other than Bianca treating Rebecca for a cut on her head, they all seemed fine, relieved even as Twilight and Magos Errol arrived. Are you all right, Tara? Matthias asked. I think so. In truth, Twilight found herself shaking as she came off her adrenaline rush, but telling that to the others did not seem vital. We'll make it out of this? Of course, Tara, Ruth said, giving Twilight a smile. The Empress tasked us with an important mission, far be it for us to fail her in such a way as this. As if to punctuate the sentiment, one last bellow from the hive tyrant was drowned out by the roaring of the knight's chainsword, blood and shards of chitin flying about as the beast was eviscerated. Twilight raised her arm to shield her eyes from the sight, gagging as she dropped further off the rush. I don't feel so good, she said. I think it's going to take me a long time to get used to this. No one is expecting you to tear apart a hive fleet on your own, Judith said. Rest for now, then we can get this mess sorted out. Twilight nodded, turning away from the others and looking across the battlefield. 3 vehicles had been completely destroyed, with several more damaged by the onslaught. Dozens of guardsmen lay dead in the field, ripped to pieces by the Tyranids. For their part, the Imperials had left their mark on the swarm, with countless smaller creatures and quite a few of the larger creatures lying dead around the crushed bodies of the Moloch and the hive tyrant. More guardsmen had arrived, dismounting from their transports while the knight scanned the horizon for further threats. So much carnage, how much of it had been her doing? Twilight shook her head to dispel such thoughts, though no doubt they would continue to linger. She drew her attention back as a younger officer approached Matthias, giving a salute before speaking. Lord Inquisitor, your tech priest alerted us that you would be in need of a transport to New Rin City, he said. 2 chimeras have been set aside for your use. They will conduct you to the city and beyond if you so desire. Just getting to the city will be fine, Matthias replied with a nod. Thank you for the rescue. Our pleasure, my lord. The man saluted again. Luckily this was only a light scouting force and we were so close. We would hate to lose you to the hive mind so soon after arriving. Twilight suppressed a shiver, but said nothing more as the officer departed to assist with the rest of the cleanup. So much death and destruction caused by a light force of Tyranids. Tara? Twilight snapped out of her thoughts before looking up at Matthias. Are you sure you're okay? She started. It'll be rough, I suppose. But I have to face this if I'm going to be of any use to the Imperium. If you say so, Matthias said with a shrug. Come, let's get to New Rin City before the Tyranids decide to come back. Chapter 2.05, The Jaws of Cetus, Roar of the Lion. The battle in space had served its purpose. The Dark Angels now had a secure orbit around Rin's world, with the Rock and other supporting ships positioned to drive off any further attacks from the Tyranids. The transports would be shielded, the great ships conveying more and more troops to the planet, and perhaps indulging the student in her little plan to get civilians off-world and out of the clutches of Cetus. The Lion had more important matters to attend to. "I want continued orbital bombardment around the main nodes," he said as he and the last of the Deathwing made their way to the rock's main teleportarium. "When we begin our attack, it should force these insects to move out and hasten their destruction." He did not wait for confirmation. Those still aboard the rock were more than capable of performing their duties, and knew well not to delay their lord. The group soon found its way to the teleportarium, quickly moving to the center as technicians prepared for transit. Several watchers drifted about, one taking a spot just beneath Johnson as they prepared for transit. "My lord," the company master on duty said when Johnson reached the center. "Our forces have engaged the enemy just south of the city of Centaurs, as well as those positions picked south of the central nodes. The Deathwing and Ravenwing have accounted themselves as well." "Good," Johnson replied. "Transport us to the nodes and alert all company masters of my arrival. On my word, snatch us away from Cetus' grasp." "Yes, my lord." The company master gave a nod, support crews prepping the teleportarium for transit. The Lion readied himself, hand resting on the hilt of his sword as he and the others were sent down to Rin's world. "Empress, if you can see this far," he thought. Let it be known that the Lion was not found wanting. There was a flash, and Johnson found himself standing in the middle of a war zone. The Dark Angels and their successors had formed two battle lines around the landing zone, tactical and devastator squads holding fast to provide withering barrages of firepower. Before them was a vast horde of Tyranids, the horizon roiling with blue and white as tens of thousands of Xenos charged the Astartes lines. Between the horde and the line, bikers and pilots of the Ravenwing had sheared through the right flank in preparation for an attack against some of the commanding Xenos, while Deathwing Knights pushed through the opening to join the battle. Beyond, Tyranid biomonstrosities traded fire with Dark Angels and Imperial Guard tanks and artillery platforms, Johnson, noting quite a few burning wrecks dotting the landscape as the Tyranids closed in. Further on, Johnson could see his target, massive towers of chitin, bone, and flesh, pulsing with eldritch energy as they directed the swarms below and above. Clouds of toxins and other gases floated about them, blotting out the sun in a purple haze that appeared to twist on its own accord. Smaller flying Xenos flitted between the towers, and Johnson could feel a low hum permeating his very being, a few hairs on the back of his neck standing on end from long-forgotten human reactions of trepidation. A perfect challenge for a Primarch. Johnson himself had arrived just before the path cut by the Ravenwing, several Deathwing Knights forming up before him to deflect incoming shots from the Tyranids. The Xenos bled away, swinging wide as their higher organisms considered this new threat. "Cowardly lot, are they?" the Lion asked, drawing his sword. "Clear the lines, then we shall strike at the heart." The Deathwing said nothing, merely stepping forward as they poured fire down on the horde. Plasma and assault cannons blazed as the Dark Angels tore a hole into the Tyranids, dozens of lesser organisms falling slain at the Lion's command. With a shriek, a line of the creatures came bounding forward, claws outstretched to attack the Astartes. The Tyranids crashed against the Deathwing Knight's shield wall like a wave, dozens of gaunt strains clawing at ceramite and adamantium. The Dark Angels struck back with grim efficiency, every swing of mace, hammer and sword slaying a score of the Xenos as they continued their inexorable advance. The Tyranids bled away, hoping to tempt the Deathwing into pursuit and thus break their formation, but the sons of Caliban were not so easily broken. Dozens more of the insects died from storms of boltfire, the ground thick with crushed corpses as the Terminators trudged onward. "This is what passes for a challenge in this era?" Johnson called over the lines as another wave of Tyranids shattered against the Deathwing. "Come now, beasts. Do not tease me with your cowardly games." The Tyranids shrieked again, ducking away from the Dark Angels as they searched about for an opening. A roar caught the Lion's attention. Barreling through the Tyranid hordes were several massive creatures, carnifexes if his research was to be trusted. The tank-sized beasts were armed with thick claws and long talons, some of them spitting acid from their jaws as they charged towards the Dark Angels. "Ah, that is more like it." Johnson readied his sword. "Brace, my sons. Show these Xenos the true might of Caliban." The shield wall firmed, the knights slowing only to ready themselves as the carnifexes came charging forward. The great beasts slammed into the Terminators, the line bending inward as the Terminators held as best they could. Even with shields and armor, some were not so fortunate, Johnson watching as one unfortunate knight was torn asunder by a swipe from one of the monster's massive talons. Others were bathed in a putrid mix of bioacids, ceramite sizzling as the concoction tried to find purchase. The Dark Angels struck back, their power weapons crashing against chitin as they battered down the carnifexes. Johnson charged forward, using his free hand to grab a hold of the tusks of one nearby specimen. The Carnifex roared as Johnson pulled the beast to the ground, claws lashing out as it tried and failed to slay the Primarch that pinned it so. The lion stabbed down with his sword, severing the Carnifex's head with a single strike before whipping the blade around to blind another. A stab upward through the palate finished off that Carnifex, the lion not even pausing as he stepped past the fallen corpses. More of the smaller creatures swarmed forward, supported by warrior strains to provide some semblance of control among the horde. The lion slid back, pulling his sword into a looser position to better handle the onrushing Tyranids. Several Deathwing Terminators armed with lightning claws stepped up to his side, bracing as the horde crashed back into them. The Terminators worked quickly, their claws slashing through the charging gaunts with ease. The lion kept his strikes controlled, going for swift sweeps to cut through the chaff as he targeted the larger strains. These seemed to be armed with a variety of claws, organic guns, and swords of bone, hissing at him as he chopped through their minions. The Tyranids fired their weapons, Johnson bracing himself as voracious beetles and worms splattered against his armor. "Disgusting," he muttered. "Will the universe ever cease to mock me with such insults?" The lion did not wait for a reply, ducking past the sword of one of the warrior strains before cleaving it in half. He blocked the next strike with ease, sparks flying into his face as bone and metal scraped along one another before he jerked his weapon forward, stabbing the Tyranid through the mouth. The next warrior suffered a similar fate, the lion quickly withdrawing his sword before stabbing forward again to gut the creature, greenish ichor splashing across his gauntlet. As the rest of the Deathwing moved to catch up with their Primarch, the lion took a moment to survey the battlefield once more. The Ravenwing had swooped in for another strike, fighters and land speeders bombarding the Tyranid center. This sortie was interrupted as dozens of crones and harpies came swooping from above, the Tyranid beasts tackling several Dark Angel flyers from the sky. Larger creatures crashed into the Dark Angel lines, Carnifexes and Tervigons tossing Astartes through the air with great sweeping strikes formed their claws and talons. Johnson gave a grunt, sweeping his sword to his right to cast off some of the Tyranid blood that had accumulated on it. The Deathwing was not moving fast enough. That would have to be remedied. "Press the attack," he said, bringing his sword to a guard position as he advanced towards the Xenos horde. Perhaps these beasts are merely too stupid to realize when they are truly challenged. The Deathwing did not say anything, preparing their weapons in silence as they advanced towards the Tyranids. More of the smaller creatures swarmed just out of reach of Johnson and the Dark Angels, darting forward only to let loose with a burst of fire before darting away again. Just as Johnson made to charge, the ground beneath him shifted. He ducked away just as a pair of Molochs burst from the ground, snapping at the Deathwing Terminators as they reformed their shield wall. The Tyranid beasts were soon joined by a similar creature, this one possessing smaller jaws and crackling with bioelectricity. The others seemed to follow this new arrival, smaller Tyranids swarming around it as it reared up over the Dark Angels. Some synapse creature no matter. Johnson raised his sword and charged, using his size to barrel through the seething horde of lesser Tyranids. The Trigon spotted the Primarch but made no effort to challenge, instead slamming into a squad of Deathwing Knights while more small Tyranids surged forward to meet the lion. The lion swept his sword downward, cleaving through a score of the creatures as he pressed through the others, their claws doing little to break through his armor before other Deathwing Terminators closed to fight them off. Thus freed, Johnson continued his charge, bringing his sword up for a stab towards the monster's chest. Just as Johnson lunged forward, the Trigon released its bioelectric pulse. Green bolts of energy flashed from the monster's body, some reaching out to strike the Deathwing while others arced towards the lion. Quickly he raised his sword to shield his face, grimacing as the energy surged through his body and burned his armor. This was followed up by a swipe from the Trigon's tail, the strike catching Johnson full across the chest and knocking him back several meters. As the Trigon focused now on the lion, the Primarch brought his sword back to a guard position as the monster surged forward. The Trigon slammed against him, lashing out with its larger talons as its head rushed down in an attempt to bite the lion in half. Johnson danced away from the talons and flicked his sword around, slashing the Trigon across the face as its jaws sank into open air. With that he whipped the blade back and stabbed at the base of the Trigon's skull, the sword stabbing through chitinous armor before stopping just shy of the hilt. The monster roared and tried to shake the Primarch loose, Johnson taking the sword in both hands as he worked to sever his opponent's head. The Trigon ultimately won the struggle, shaking the lion free with one final thrash. His sword slipped from his grasp, clattering just out of reach of the lion as the wounded Trigon reared up to face its foe. Johnson backed up, looking around the beast for an opening to rearm himself, hands balling into fists in preparation to fight. With a roar the Trigon surged downward, but the lion darted away and rammed his fist into the beast's face, chitin and ichor splattering across his gauntlet as he tore one of its eyes free. The Trigon howled and thrashed again, knocking the lion away once more as it tried to make up for lost vision. Fortunately, the strike brought Johnson within reach of his sword. With one lunge he reached the blade, crushing a nearby warrior with his free hand as he rose to face the wounded Trigon once more. Taking his sword in two hands, the lion advanced forward again, the Trigon roaring as it lunged one more time. However, Johnson took a quick step to the side, twisting his body and swinging downward just as the Trigon rushed past. The tyrannid shrieked as a large chunk of its spine slid away from the strike, the monster writhing in agony as Johnson brought his sword around and advanced. "You almost presented a challenge, beast," he said, taking a reverse grip and plunging the sword deep into the Trigon's chest. "Almost." The lesser tyrannids swarming the Deathwing took notice, melting away again as the Terminators reformed their line and battered down the Molochs. Johnson cleaned his sword again before turning on his Voxcaster. "Gunners." "At your command, my lord," came the reply from the rock. "Draw initial targeting matrices on my position, and maintain lock," he said, drawing back as the Deathwing formed up around him. "On my signal, commence bombardment." "Yes, my lord." Johnson looked back at the battlefield watching as the Tyranids rallied and prepared the next wave. Now, they seemed to realize the Primarch and Deathwing as a larger threat, more of their greater beasts hurting towards the Terminators while the rest of the Dark Angels were allowed to reform. Several of their large artillery beasts, Tyrannifexes and Exocrines, lined up to commence bombardment of the Deathwing, while Carnifexes and Warriors led the charging tide of Gaunts towards the Astartes. "Slow withdrawal," the lion said. "Bring the Xenos in close and away from the main lines." The Deathwing consented without a word, knights forming up as those armed with ranged weapons continued to blaze away at the Tyranids. The Xenos surged forward and bled away, probing the slowly retreating Dark Angels for weaknesses in their lines. Then the larger Tyranids fired. Bioplasma and rupture cannon seeds exploded among the Deathwing, blasting through several veterans before the Deathwing Knights could intercept them with their storm shields. The gun line of the Dark Angels faltered for the briefest of instances, allowing the Tyranids a chance to surge forward before the Astartes could beat them back. Still the slow retreat continued, Johnson eyeing the Tyranids carefully for the right moment to strike. "My lord," the gunner called through the lion's vox. "We have a targeting solution ready." "Good. Commence bombardment." "My lord, you are still within the blast radius of most of our weapons. Should you get caught?" "Commence bombardment." Johnson interrupted, leaning his head slightly to one side to dodge an incoming rupture cannon shot. "My calculations will have us well outside the blast zone." "At your command, my lord." During the Great Crusade such hesitancy would have received a severe reprimand, but the lion was feeling generous today. As he braced, his hand brushed against a communicator on his arm, a quick signal heading back to the rock. "Hold them just a bit longer, my sons," he called. "The hour of their destruction is at hand." The Tyranids closed in again, though some of their commanding creatures could sense something was afoot once the Deathwing stopped advancing. Already the lion could see great lances of light scything through the clouds from space, his vision going white as the orbital barrage neared. The rock and supporting ships unleashed hellfire upon the Tyranid swarm. Dozens of lance batteries and macro cannons vaporized the Xenos horde, a sea of fire consuming anything that moved on or beneath the ground. Slowly the gunfire from the Dark Angel line died down, the Astartes consolidating themselves while the fleet continued to pound away at the hordes of Cetus. The air near the center of the Imperial line shimmered before the lion and his Deathwing teleported in. "Good, they understood my orders," Johnson thought. "This new generation can be trained." He moved forward as one company master crossed to him, the Astartes bowing low before speaking. "My lord," the Astartes said. "The line holds, and the Imperial Guard reinforcements will be in force soon." "Good." The lion replied, bidding the company master to follow him. "Begin building fortifications. We will use this as a forward operating base as we begin our attack on the nodes. Once our heavy guns are in position, we can begin a general assault on the hive nodes." "Yes, my lord." The Primarch and Astartes were interrupted by a junior officer hurrying to them. "Lords, the Tyranid forces are in full retreat," he said breathlessly. "Your orders?" Johnson did not answer right away, moving towards the front line while the others followed. The bombardment had slacked away, allowing the lion to watch the Tyranids as they tried to recover from the attack. Most of the immediate swarm had been reduced to ash, but a few larger organisms were hard at work leading what remained away, shrieking at their enemies as they fled from sight. "Attack aircraft are to harass them, but the main force shall not engage until our landing zones are secured," he said. Any pursuit now would risk us being overstretched and overrun. Once we have consolidated and the Raven Wing has reconned our enemy, then we shall attack. At your command, my lord. Both the company master and the junior officer departed, calling orders to those forces arrayed. The Lion remained motionless, watching as the last few rounds of gunfire were traded between Imperial and Xena's forces. This round was his. Now to ensure that the next would belong to him as well.
Parameters change. Swarm stalled. New force. Prey stands against swarm. Resisting. Do not understand plan. Swarms hold until stand confirmed. Challenger. Predator that lurks in the shadows not present. One of prey reeks of them. Observation shows prey consider this creature leader among them. Synaptic node. Prey disunified. Not bound. Must be bound together. Parameters change. Creature insignificant. But sight in eyes of prey raises chances. Opportunities. Swarm must know. Must bind new information to consciousness. Find the creature. Consume. Devour all that know.
Twilight was no fan of the Chimera transport, in no small part due to one of the worst days of her life truly kicking off while she was stuck inside one. Still, with the sisters to guard her, and surrounded by humans who were not trying to kill her, she could feel at least some comfort. We are approaching New Rin City now, the driver called from ahead. We will be taking another group of troops to the front, so you'll have to make the rest of the way on foot once we pass the gate. Your help bringing us this far is more than welcome. Sister Naomi said, looking back to the other sisters and Twilight. Is there anything you wish to say, Terra? Twilight said, shaking her head quickly. Sorry, I was just lost in thought there for a moment. There shouldn't be much you'll need to protect me from in the city, so you can do your best to integrate with the forces and populace, maybe find some ways my plan can be improved on. Once you are properly protected, Naomi said. After what happened on Caesarea, I do not intend to leave you alone without some assurance you will be well guarded. The Astartes and Lord Matthias will be there, sister, Veronica offered. Will that be enough to set your mind at ease? In time. Twilight chewed her lip, but said nothing more. Naomi was just being cautious, there was no need to falter for that. Soon, the rumble of the Chimera's engine slowed, the vehicle coming to a stop. The sisters quickly undid their restraints, Twilight grabbing her sword from where it rested before turning towards the entrance hatch. There was a pause before the door swung downward, giving Twilight her first real glimpse of New Rin City and its defenses. The outer walls were much like those from Canterlot, well crafted and fresh compared to the rigid industrial feel of Caesarea or Terra. Like everything in the Imperium, they were built to grand scale, the lowest points looming 30 meters above the assembly ground between it and the city proper. Bastions and macro battery turrets broke the uniformity of the ring around the city, some still blazing away at unseen tyrant encroachment. Between the outer and inner wall stood a golden statue of some great hero of the past, a space marine champion holding aloft a giant blue flag adorned with a red fist as he crushed an orc skull beneath his boot. The statue spoke of a triumphant past. The forces arrayed around it held to an air of grim resignation. Twilight could see hundreds if not thousands of guardsmen, some marching forward to board transports and tanks to take them to the fight while others helped wounded comrades limp back to New Rin City and to safety. Most were dressed in the olive and brown uniforms of Cadia, but she could see a multitude of other regiments and uniforms present among the masses, from the sharp blue and red uniforms of the local Rinsguard to the tank tops and khakis of Katakan. Most of the guardsmen were too focused on their own duties to pay Twilight and the sisters any mind, though they did get a glance or two as they moved through the crowds in search of Matthias and his henchmen. They did not have to go far. Twilight spotted the Inquisitor and the others speaking with the familiar figure of Vulcan Meerschain, the salamander flanked by a squad of his fellow Astartes. Twilight quickened her pace to meet the group, smiling as she drew closer. Matthias. Meerschain. Ah, Miss Terra, Meerschain said, his voice muffled by the faceplate of his helmet. I understand from Lord Matthias that you encountered a bit of trouble on your way in. Twilight's smile slipped, but she did her best to appear calm. Yes, she said. Our ship was brought down to the south, and we had to fight off the Tyranids on our way here. We also encountered the enemy upon our arrival. It was now that Twilight could see that Meerschain was covered from head to toe in greenish-blue ichor, the Forgefather giving a small chuckle. Fortunately neither has seemed to give us too much trouble, have they? No, I guess not. Twilight's smile had fallen away, thoughts of the recent battle coming back to her mind. I mean no offense, Terra, Meerschain said, stepping forward and resting a giant hand on Twilight's shoulder. I know you are not one accustomed to fighting, but you should not allow such terrors to crush your spirit like this. Take pride that your actions saved the lives of your friends, that they may fight another day to save the Imperium. I know, Twilight's smile returned. And thank you for your kind words. You are quite welcome. Meerschaum said. Now, I had intended to report to Lord General Hirsch and Lord Nevers of the Crimson Fists, that they may know the sons of Vulcan stand by their sides. Shall I conduct you to them? Please do, Matthias said, stepping up to Twilight. The sooner we get an understanding of what we have to work with, the sooner we can cast Cetus back to the void. No doubt. Please, this way. Meerschaum and the other salamanders started off towards the main city, Twilight and Matthias following while their respective teams formed up behind them. Meerschaum and the other Astartes kept their pace slow, perhaps to make sure Twilight and the others did not wear themselves out trying to keep up with the Space Marines. Following Meerschaum, Twilight could get a better view of the soldiery of Rin's world. Many of the soldiers were injured, some with minor cuts and scrapes while others limped about on splints and rudimentary prosthetics. Red-robed tech priests swarmed around Leman Russ and Predator tanks, doing their best to patch claw marks and holes melted from acid. Others were not so lucky, Twilight doing her best to keep composed as unlucky conscripts mopped their comrades out of a broken chimera, mini-storm priests and servitors passing incense over what pieces could be buried. The sisters and Matthias henchmen made little notice, at first, though Twilight felt sisters Rebecca and Bianca quailing at the sight of the carnage. The forces seem to be in good order, Matthias said, turning his attention back to Meerschaum. With the Primarchs and the Empress, we may yet hold Cetus back. Your confidence is admirable, Inquisitor, Meerschaum said. My fear, though, is that we may not be enough to end this before more of such losses are seen. But then, that is what we Astartes are here for. There aren't many Space Marines around here, Twilight said. Are they at the front? I am not one to answer that question, Meerschaum said, turning his head so he could look at Twilight from the corner of his eye. Lord Nevers commands the Astartes forces upon Rin's world, at least until the Lion and Lord Korax can take full command. Perhaps he can answer your questions. That was enough for Twilight, for now, and she fell silent again as they continued towards the inner wall. Curiosity bade her to look around more, but to take in more of the carnage in the battle against Cetus she shivered. Not yet, I'm not ready yet. They soon came to a forward command post, Cadians and Rinites standing at attention as Astartes and Mortals stepped forward. Ahead, Twilight could see two figures, one a Space Marine clad in dark blue armor with red fists while the other was a taller man with a fine uniform and mustache, his great coat pinned to one side to compensate for his missing right arm. The general stood straighter before giving a short bow. Forgefather, he said. It is a pleasure to fight alongside you again. General Hirsch. Meerschaum gave the general a short nod. I see you have recovered since the Mandragoran Wars. No Xena's weapon can keep me down for long, my friend. The general replied with a chuckle. Meerschaum turned his attention next to the other Astartes. Lord Nevers, he said. It is an honor to meet you in person. The pleasure is all mine. The Lord of the Crimson Fists replied. With the Sons of Nocturne at our side, perhaps the Crimson Fists may survive yet another trial. Nevers looked to Twilight. And who might you be? My name is Terra, Twilight replied, giving a short nod. I'm the personal student of the Empress. Is that so? The Astartes replied. I had heard rumors that the Emperor had returned as a woman, never heard a student came with her. There was a pause. It matters not. If you are here to fight with us, far be it for me to reject an ally. Oh, okay. Twilight shuffled a bit, saying nothing more. You come at a welcome time, General Hirsch said, leading the group towards a table on which rested a map of Rin's world. The Tyranids press in on us from all sides, though we still hold most of Sirocco and the fortresses in the mountains, plus whatever holdouts remain on Magellan. Numbers are not on our side, though, Nevers said. I command 400 of my surviving brothers, and perhaps twice that in survivors from those chapters that have come to assist us. Many of those are pinned in at the Arx Tyrannus, but they should be able to hold. The Raven Guard are deploying in force, so that may help. Meerschaum said. What of other forces? Fortunately my regiment still hold Rin City Spaceport, General Hirsch said. Unfortunately we've lost Scar Lake Air Base and Porta Callis, and most of our air and sea power along with them. We're holding on as it is, but it won't be long before the spaceport falls and Cetus gets a clear shot at the city itself. I would like a chance to inspect the spaceport, Matthias said, drawing the Lord General and the Crimson Fist's attention. Cetus is known for its infiltration units, and I want to make sure that your forces are prepared for any subterfuge that comes against them. My men are no strangers to fighting Tyranids, Lord Inquisitor, Hirsch said quickly. Nevertheless, their experience is probably trumped by yours, perhaps there is something I have overlooked that you might see. Thank you. Matthias nodded. The General and Lord Nevers turned their attention now to Twilight. "And what is your role, student?" the Space Marine asked. "Miss Terra has orders from the Empress to coordinate the civilian populations in preparation for a potential evacuation," Meerschaum said. There was a lengthy pause as the commanders considered this. "With all due respect, is that not a diversion of resources we don't need right now?" Hirsch asked. "It's better than letting 30 million people get eaten by those monsters," Twilight said, her brow furrowing. "Give me a few days, I'll have things sorted out so you barely expend any resources at all. Maybe one company of soldiers and our transports, but nothing that should seriously impact the defenses of New Rin City or the rest of Sirocco." "That is a bold claim, student," Nevers said. "We already struggle as it is to keep those within the city alive, and you would claim the ability to evacuate them to safety." "I can do it," Twilight said, firming up her stance. "I've had a lot of people doubting me about this, but I can do it. The Empress asked me to." While that did seem to win over the Imperial Guard commander, Twilight was still unsure of the Astartes. He continued to stare at her through blood-red lenses, searching for any sign of weakness of body or spirit. "If it is possible, I look forward to seeing what you come up with," he said finally. "As long as it does not impede our continued defense of Rin's world. Your value of civilians is admirable, but this is home of the Crimson Fists and our people. I will have final say as to what actions will directly impact them." Of course. Small victory, but Twilight would take what she could get. If an evacuation is desired, that will make holding the spaceport even more important. General Hirsch said, looking back to the map. "I can maybe pull a few regiments in from the northern sectors of the city, but if the Tyranids attempt a flanking maneuver we may not be able to hold the Jadeberry Bridge." "My brothers will hold your bridge," Meerschaum said, straightening up. "And there are others as well. Fellow Sons of Dorn, the Raven Guard, even the Dark Angels, 5,000 Astartes and 10 million guardsmen will be landed by the end of the week, more than enough to hold the city and save Rin's world from destruction. Nearly as many have died to keep us where we stand now," Nevers said, his voice now somber and controlled. "But perhaps you are right, and these new arrivals are just what we need to take our victory here. While I must return to our fortress to continue the defenses there, I shall not leave you wanting for strategy here." "That is all we can hope for," Meerschaum replied with a nod. The Astartes and guard officers would continue their talk of war, while Twilight and the others faded into the background of their discussion. Not that she minded, some of her best learning and observation came from standing off to the side and watching. And she would need all she could get. 30 million lives depended on her. Company Master Ramiel, late of the Guardians of the Covenant and now assigned to the Dark Angel Ravenwing, was frustrated. It was not that he and his fellow Ravenwing had been tasked with scouting out the enemy. Some chapters might have frowned upon being sent out to observe rather than engage, but Ramiel and his fellows were beyond such concerns. Scouting was a vital part of the Unforgiven's battle plan, and the Ravenwing and successors always rose to the challenge. It was not that they brought along with them a small score of neophytes. The Guardians always took great pride in educating the later generations of Astartes, and Ramiel had been toying with the idea of asking for command the 10th Company if for no other reason than to change up his normal approach to war before the Primarch awoke. What frustrated Ramiel was that Cetus was so infuriatingly good at masking their forces. "Scouts have returned, my lord," one of his brothers said. Ramiel watched as the small squad of light bikes returned in the dark, his enhanced vision picking out their shapes with ease. The bikes pulled to a stop just shy of the main Ravenwing force, the sergeant dismounting to speak with Ramiel. "Report," he said. "We spotted more of those organic towers, but no other forces to be had," the sergeant said, shoulders hunched in frustration. "Maybe a few guard organisms, but nothing like what we faced this morning." "So the monsters strike and then bleed away into the shadows," Ramiel grumbled. Not unlike the beasts of the Lilith incursion, there was a pause as Ramiel mulled over the situation. His orders from the Lion were to survey all of the Tyranid base, but continued exploration continued to reveal that the hive mind was crafty enough to hide even from the Space Marines, and no new information could be had. Continued exploration would only further risk the Ravenwing's discovery and draw them into battle if they had not already been tracked since their arrival. "Mount up," he said, turning back to the others of his retinue. "We'll continue to the next marker, and then we will return to the Lion with our report." The others gave no reply, and what reply they could have said would soon be drowned out by the roar of the Ravenwing bikes. It would take a moment for the Space Marines to form up fully, the speedier neophytes taking point while the full brothers kept a watchful eye to the rear. They continued like a dark arrow against the night, the only light being from the occasional backfire of an engine and the faint glow of red helmet lenses. The terrain of Rin's world was hilly, not helped by the scars of war and the increasing encroachment of the Hive fleet. Even for master riders of the Ravenwing the going was rough, the shock absorbers of the Astartes bikes barely holding back the shocks and bumps as they rode along. Ramiel saved them from the worst, but even he was not blind to the fact they were not advancing as rapidly as he would have liked, as his lord would have liked. More frustrations. Always frustrations. Contact. Ramiel had only scant seconds to process the neophyte's call before a shadow bounded towards one of the leading bikes. The beast stood taller than an Astartes, its height enhanced even further by a pair of mandibles growing from its back. Ramiel gunned the engine on his bike and charged, hoping to catch the lictor in the side before it had a chance to finish off the neophyte it had tackled. The beast was quick, but not quick enough. With a crunch, Ramiel struck the lictor's legs, the creature shrieking as it was knocked away by the impact. It lashed out with its talon, but Ramiel easily drifted the bike out of the strike, unhitching his power axe from the clamp on his belt as he faced the wounded creature. Another rev of the engine and Ramiel was upon it, an underhand strike taking the lictor's head off with contemptuous ease. Around him, he could hear cries of men and Xenons as more of the enemy joined the fray. 2 more lictors sprung from the shadows, accompanied by a small score of lesser Tyranids eager to spill the blood of Astartes. The neophytes drew back, twin bolters and shotguns blazing into the dark while the Ravenwing darted forward to split the swarm and perhaps drive them off. Ramiel brought up his axe and charged, his bike crushing several gaunts as he made for the next lictor. This one had knocked Brother Harad from his bike, the Space Marine raising his blade in a futile strike as the Tyranid ripped at his stomach. No Astartes had to die like that. The sight only filled Ramiel with rage. The Tyranid stopped its mauling of the fallen biker to face the company master. Mandibles lashed out, striking gashes in Ramiel's arm and leg armor, but not enough to wound the Space Marine. With his free arm, Ramiel whipped his bike around again, sweeping around until he was broadside of the Tyranid. His axe descended before the lictor could turn to face him, the head sinking deep between its mandibles with a crunch. The Tyranid shrieked, trying to pry itself free from Ramiel's blade, but the company master gave a grunt as he pulled the body toward the front of his bike. The twin plasma talons spoke once, blasting the monster's head to melted slag with 2 direct hits. The sound of battle began to die down, replaced by the mewling of dying Tyranids and the rumble of Astartes bikes. Ramiel swept his vision across the night, ignoring the flickering rune that alerted him to Harad's passing moments, but he could find no further sign of the enemy. Always frustrations. Report. He called. Calyx is wounded, but he can still ride. One of the other Ravenwing said. We are collecting Harad. Astartes could feel few of their original human emotions, but Ramiel allowed his rage to grow. It was but a small skirmish, not even worth mentioning, and yet he had lost a brother to the aliens. We will have our revenge, Ramiel growled. But not this night. Our orders are to observe and learn, nothing more. Yes, my lord. Ramiel was prepared to turn back to the path when the neophyte sergeant pulled up in front of him. My lord, we drew off some of the Tyranids during the fight, he said. But 2 of my neophytes have fallen behind. The swarm was such we could not retrieve them. Ramiel gritted his teeth. 1 brother down, another injured, and 2 neophytes unaccounted for? This mission had proved to be a complete disaster. Perhaps the lion might show me some semblance of mercy. Unlikely. We will try to locate our lost brothers, he said, strapping his axe back to his belt. Perhaps this may also lead us to some better understanding of what we face.
Intelligence gathered. Loss of infiltrator units acceptable. Lord among foes. Lion. The name means nothing. Only part of prey. Acquiring strength of lion will strengthen swarm. Must consume lion. New information. Predator. True predator. Empress. What is Empress? Process information. Beyond. Predator. Like predator who lurks in the shadows. Empress must be destroyed, consumed. Failure will destroy swarm. Success break prey. Empress is present. Parameters change. Swarm irrelevant. For Empress must be consumed. End of chapter 2.05. The Jaws of Cetus, Roar of the Lion.